we're talking about Mandalorian episode 2 now.
Spoilers, if you have not seen episode 2 of The Mandalorian, or especially episode 1 as well, I guess.
Don't watch this show right now.
Just stop watching now until you've seen Mandalorian.
Yeah. So first, I was delighted that we're getting this. So, like, just a few hours after the first one, because I was like ready for some more after the first episode.
That is what a good show premiere does. It draws you in and gives you a whole bunch of questions that you have a mighty need for answers.
Yeah, and we it really left us on one of those like, holy shit, especially in the Star Wars universe.
Yeah.
Like every Star Wars fan who knows anything about Star Wars is like,
wait a minute.
Yeah. So this is a good part to mention that Pedro Pascal, the guy that plays the Mandalorian, accidentally leaked his character's name in a character in a press junket or whatever, and no one's really sure of this like the spelling of it because he kind of mumbled it, but it's Din Djarin. That's what it sounded like.
Okay.
Doesn't matter. It's just kind of nice that he has a name.
Yeah. Right.
That we'll eventually learn it officially.
Maybe.
Yeah. So this episode opens right up with.
It's more or less right after the previous episode, right?
Right. So he grabs. We're gonna call him Sweet Baby Yoda from now on.
You can do that.
Yeah.
I'll just call him Baby Yoda
until he has a name.
Yeah.
And he's taking Sweet Baby Yoda to the ship, and he's going through a cavern, and we see a scene that we saw in the trailer, which is like 3 or 4 Trandoshans kind of jump out of nowhere.
Pretty sure it's just 3.
Yeah. And there's this like beautiful Clint Eastwood moment too, where like his hands like on his gun and everything, and he's like looking around.
You can tell the people behind this show were like really studying their old westerns.
Yeah. Oh, everything about this, especially this episode, is like 100% Western. And I think it's hilarious that Trandoshans can get the draw on the Mandalorian, and he still kicks the shit out of them.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. He's like, I didn't need that gun. I was just going to reach for it to make it a little easier on myself. So he whoops their ass. The one recurring thing that I noticed throughout the show that I loved was that Sweet Baby Yoda would like look at something, and then we'd get to see what he was looking at. Yeah. And he's got like these big curious eyes, and he's just like watching the whole time, like, oh, what's going on? What is this?
He also got these very emotive ears, kind of perk up and then droop down.
Yeah, I know. Do you think it's a puppet? I can't imagine they would CG that, because it's like you could make a puppet that looks that good, and it would be, a tenth of the cost.
I'm not sure. I need to look at it again.
I think it's a puppet.
I suspect there is a puppet there, and they're maybe doing some CG touch up for very specific things.
Sweet enough, yeah. So he straight up disintegrates one of those Trandoshans, by the way.
That's what that big rifle does.
Yep. Well, we thought it only shocked things, but now we know it disintegrates things, because he was running towards Sweet Baby Yoda. He was going to steal him, and Bando's like, fuck off, and he's like, now he's just dust somewhere in the canyon. So they make camp that night. He's injured. He has like a wound on his arm, and he's using some kind of tool. I don't even know if it's like a medical tool, but it's something that makes things very hot. It looks like he's trying to cauterize it.
It looks like a welder or something.
Yeah. And Yoda crawls out of his we can't call him Yoda because I don't know.
Baby Yoda.
Yeah, whoever it is crawls out of his like little crib, and in like one of the cutest parts of the entire episode, like waddles over and then puts his like little 3-fingered hand up and like closes his eyes, and you're like, that son of a bitch is going to use the Force. Watch. And before, like there's a little bit of a swell in music, and then the Mando grabs him. It's like, sit in your fucking crib.
Get back in there.
Yeah. So he sits down, starts welding his arm back or whatever the fuck he was doing, and he looks over, and it had crawled out of his cage.
Baby Yoda again.
Does the same thing, and he puts it back, and he just like closes the hatch on it, and he's like, that'll be enough of that. And so the next day, they get to their ship. They raise a crest, and if you guys can hear my dog, I'm very sorry. He's a little upset that I'm not upstairs with him right now. So maybe next time we'll have a
dog cam.
Yeah, we'll have like a segment on meeting my dogs. So they go to his ship, they raise a crest, and what do you know? Fucking Jawas are tearing it the fuck apart.
As you do.
Yeah, and they're not destroying it. They're just like ransacking it for parts.
Yeah.
And I thought for a second maybe that would be Tatooine.
I really thought it was.
It's not. it has when I was researching this, it has a name, and then of course Jawas I guess can be anywhere, you know.
Guess,
yeah.
But are sandcrawlers also everywhere?
I assume that sandcrawlers are wherever Jawas are, because I think that's kind of the thing that they do.
Maybe.
Yeah. So he sees that they're like taking a ship apart, and he straight up starts murdering them.
He pulls out his rifle and starts sniping them.
We've been looking for this thing in Star Wars ever since we saw Jawas, right? Because they're annoying. You know that they probably smell bad because they're out in the desert
and they wear the brown robes, and you know they sweat a ton in those things.
Yeah. So he straight up murders a bunch of them from a distance, and so they kind of freak out a little bit, and they're like, "Fuck it, we're out of here."
As you would expect.
Yeah.
Yes.
So they jump into their sandcrawler and they start riding. He damages a part of it or something to make it, I guess, slow down. But he starts climbing on it and is like pulling them out of the windows and throwing them, and they're dying. Like it's literally
it's a phenomenal action sequence.
It's just like him punting Jawas. Yeah. It's like it's just I didn't know that I needed that in my Star Wars until then. I was like, oh, this is so good. He gets to the top, and there are a bunch of them, and he reaches for his gun, and they've all got those like shock things, and every single one of those motherfuckers shoots him with it, and it just like he just kind of goes rigid, and then just falls off the sandcrawler. Yeah. So
next shot is little baby Yoda, who has ridden his crib.
Oh yeah, the whole time. I forgot to mention that. You know, they do a really good job of filming this in a way that we never lose track of where people are. So like there's a shot in that action sequence where he's like just speeding along in his little crib, just like he's like, I don't know what we're doing, but this is kind of fun. Yeah. So he catches up and he just watches him for a few hours, I guess, while he's just laying there unconscious. And he wakes up and he's like, well, I only know one guy on this planet, and my ship's fucked up. So, because he checks his ship out, and it's pretty wrecked.
It's a lost cause.
Yeah, all of his guns are gone, and
I think that made him more angry.
Oh, he was because he's like slammed the door and everything. Yeah. So he goes back to I call him Mr. I Have Spoken because I can't remember what his name is.
Yeah.
But he goes back to him, and I swear to God, that smug motherfucker looks like he like expected him to be back at some point, because he doesn't even like turn to him, and he's like, I thought you were dead. And so they talk a little bit about the Jawas, and he's like, you should trade with them, and the man is like, you should shut up because that's my stuff. And like they stole it from me in the first place. And he has a line about how Jawas don't destroy things, they salvage things or something. Yeah. It sounded pretty meta for Star Wars. And so they work out this thing. They grab what I assume is a hover sled, and they ride out and find the Jawas. And the guy that he's with speaks the language, which is kind of cool.
Pretty fluent Jawa.
Yeah. So the Jawas are pretty panicked to see the Mando again, as certainly alive. Everything's calmed down, and they start talking, and they're trying to like negotiate.
Like, hey, give us your armor.
Yeah, that's the first thing is like, we want his armor, and the thing that was, well, at first they wanted him to put his guns down. Yeah. And the cool thing I noticed was that he's like, I'm a Mandalorian, like my religion is my weapon.
The guns are my religion.
Yeah. And there's something about how he, like, when he's like, that's not going to work, dude. And there was something about, he's like, oh, fuck it. I figured I'd try. And it's like he's used that trick before and it's worked. And he's like, okay, whatever. So they all sit down in like a little powwow, because that's what you do with Jawas. You sit cross-legged in a powwow.
Makes them feel less short.
Yeah. And they start negotiating. First they want his armor, and he's like, he's a Mandalorian, he's not going to give up that armor, and like, you're lucky to be here alive right now with him sitting here, so what's next? And
they're like, hey, give us that baby.
Yeah. And that elicited a fuck you, I'm going to torch you with my arm. And
actually that was after,
it was a little before, I think.
They insulted his Jawa, and so like they burned him, and he attempted to burn them. Yeah. Except his was literal.
Yeah. It was, because he tried to speak the language, right? Yeah. And they just laughed at him, and that was funny as fuck, because what did they say? They said that he sounded like a Wookiee or something. Yeah. It was pretty funny. That's another thing, is that this show so far has had humor that's like right on point. It's really, really cool. So
finally they say, okay, notes here. Yeah, we can't get your armor, we can't get the baby. How about you get us an egg?
Yeah, the egg. And they're like I like how they just like kind of huddle and think about it for a second, and they're like, this fucker could probably get the egg. Let's ask him to do it. Yeah. And so no one knows.
Jawas just go ape shit for this fucking egg.
Yeah, no one knows what it is, or anything.
Just say, hey, it's in that cave. Go get it.
So he takes the baby with him, and he goes to the cave, and he pulls his gun out, and it cuts to a shot of sweet baby Yoda outside, like looking into the like this dark hole. Yeah, I was watching this with John earlier, and he's like, "Is that a Sarlacc pit?" It's like, "Have you ever seen a Sarlacc pit? It's not a Sarlacc pit.
It's too vertical to be a Sarlacc pit."
Yeah, this creature has some weird noises, and that's one thing I noticed about the sound design. But you hear this really weird noise, and some blaster shots, and then the Mandalorian just comes flying out of the cave, and like I can't remember. I couldn't tell if he had been like hit with something or if his armor would just like busted off.
I think what it was is that like this creature looks like a rhinoceros.
I call it a mossnoceros. Look at my notes. I literally wrote mossnoceros.
Yeah, good. I think it just like speared him in the chest and rammed him.
Broke some stuff up. Yeah. So they have well, it's actually called a mudhorn. I think that's what its like official name is. So they have this little fight. The Mando's not doing too well, and like he tries to like roast it, and that didn't work.
It reminded me of one of those Western scenes where like he's facing down like a wild bronco or something.
Yeah, because he tries to set it on fire, and that doesn't work. Which would, to be fair, would be like my first. I would try to set it on fire first.
Set it on fire.
And
you got a flamethrower in your wrist. What else are you gonna do with it?
Yeah. And he tries to lasso it, or he tries to do something with the grappling hook.
That was the most Western part of the whole show.
Yeah. So they there's this exchange. The mudhorn hits him pretty hard in the chest, and his guns are broken and shit. And he gets up on his knees, and he's like, "Well, fuck it. If I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die with a knife in my hand." And he has his like little knife ready to go.
It's a vibro knife.
Yeah, and he's not even he's barely it looks like he's barely holding himself up.
This is another really nice sequence because earlier there was this real quick bunch of shots where he's like checking all his armor and weapons.
And he puts the knife.
Yeah, he puts the knife in his boot.
Yeah, this thing is running
Chekhov's knife.
Yeah, exactly. This thing's running right at him, and you know that it does that's a pretty small fucking
dead.
knife. Yeah, and. So let
running.
me preface this by saying earlier in the episode that when they had the thing where sweet baby Yoda kept getting out of his crib, I was like, that's them teasing us about him using the Force. He's not going to use the Force. So several minutes later in the episode, this mossnoceros is running straight toward the Mandalorian. Yep, and he looks like he hits an invisible wall. And everyone's confused. Like the mossnoceros is like, the fuck's going on?
He's like scrabbling in the mud and
slowly lifts off the goddamn floor. And this is right around where I lost my collective shit when I was watching this. I was like pissing myself. This is like 7:30 in the morning or something. And
my favorite part of this is that the Mandalorian just kind of turns slowly to look at Baby Yoda.
Camera cuts, and it's the most Yoda thing in the world. And we're gonna talk about that, by the way, because I don't know what to think about any of this right now. But
the baby face is all scrunched up in concentration.
Yep. And it's the most badass thing in the world. It was pretty fucking cool. And he passes out from exertion. He just, it's a lot. He kind of goes to sleep. He's like, okay, nap time. And the Mando stabs the mudhorn right in the face. It's like, fuck you.
It just kind of falls over.
I didn't need the Force to beat you. So he finds the egg. And they kind of
this gigantic thing. It's covered in these
moss,
fur.
Yeah, it's really strange. So he kind of limps back. The Jawas look like they're about to leave.
Yeah,
because they're like he's dead. Yeah, we sent him out here partly because we hated him. We wanted him to die. Yeah,
we knew he was gonna die.
Yeah. So they get back. The Jawas have this really weird. It's really interesting how they portray them as really tribal. And they have these customs, and this one custom they have is there's one Jawa that gets to hold the egg, and he walks off, and they all get into a line and follow him. And it kind of mirrors this thing from A New Hope where they do the same thing when they find R2-D2.
Yep.
Yeah, and he just pulls out a knife, and because you don't know what if it's really valuable and they're gonna sell it, or
if it has religious significance or what,
or if there's a diamond in it. You don't know, and he cuts the top of it off, and it's literally just a bowl full of egg yolk.
And they all just reach their hands in and
it's
start
like
eating
Winnie
it.
the Pooh and fucking Honey, man. They were just like, they were balls deep in it. And like the Mando and the other guys kind of look at each other and like, what the fuck, man? Whatever. Yeah. So they leave. They get back and with all their parts. And the Mando's like, we need a real facility to do this. This is going to take days. And I wish I remembered this guy's name. All the best lines in this show so far have come from him. And he's like, well, it might take a little less if you help me. And so they start working on it as a nice other like super westerny montage of them like fixing stuff.
I wish they would have given every single shot a little bit more attention, because like a bunch of them are like overlaid each other and it's kind of hard to see what exactly is going on.
Yeah, I guess I didn't care so much about that. I was just like, oh, they're being friends, yay. And so they fix it up, the engines fire up, and they have this conversation, this really touching conversation on
Mando's like, hey, you should come work for me.
Well, first he tries to pay him. He's like, look, you've helped me a lot, so let me give you a part of the money from this. And the guy's like first of all, no, and second of all, you can't pay me because you're my guest, and like I'm bound to serve you right here. And the man is like, well, I mean, you'd be a cool guy to hang out with. I'm just saying. And he's like, no, the whole reason for me helping you in the first place was that you would come and take care of this problem, and now you've brought peace to my valley. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to go back to what I was doing before all this shit started going down. And he's like, okay, fair enough. And I forgot to mention that while they're writing back with the parts, he asks the Mando about Sweet Baby Yoda. Mm-hmm. And he's like, so run that past me again.
Like, how did that happen?
Yeah.
He just kind of lifted his hand and...
Yeah, and the Mando's like...
I don't fucking know.
Yeah, because he's the guy was like, I don't understand. Can you explain this to me? He's like, I don't get it. Yeah,
no, I can't explain.
Yeah, and he asks him, is like, is he injured? And he's like, I don't think he's injured.
He's breathing. He's just taking a nap.
Yeah, he's tired, I guess, because he
all
said not
tuckered
physically.
out.
Yeah, not physically injured. And Sweet Baby Yoda's still asleep when they take off.
He's conked out.
Yeah, and so right as the ship takes off, there's this really cool, not so Star Wars, but super old Western soundtrack with like this big brass fanfare and everything. Mm-hmm. It's very heroic and very triumphant sounding. And the ship takes off, and they get into space, and Sweet Baby Yoda like wakes up and like looks around, and that's how the episode ends. And it was a cool, the thing, we're going to get into our reviews here real quick. So I'll say this first. I didn't like that it was so short. Like, it felt super short, and I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt because, first of all, this isn't that big of a deal because out of the short stuff that we had, all of it was excellent. Like, all of it was 100% excellent. Like, I was riveted the entire time.
This is also way more Star Wars than we had a week ago.
True. And somehow way more Westerny than we had a week ago, too.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how they're doing it, but I'll probably say this every time we do one of these.
Yep.
Dave Filoni, Jon Favreau, like, they're fucking geniuses. It just works so well. So I also figured, we just had the last episode, like, 4 days ago. Mm-hmm. So maybe their intention was to make that one 40 minutes and then make this one 30 minutes, and then the next one will be like a regular length TV show. It's hard to tell because we don't have run times for them. So what I wrote was I loved it. Like, and especially the Jawas getting killed. Like, that was like one of my favorite parts. Aside from like, clone Yoda or Baby Yoda or whatever he is, like pulling his guns out and like being a badass somehow. The Jawas was my second favorite part.
You're a terrible
person. I know. It's like I said earlier. I didn't know that there was this thing inside of me that wanted Jawas to die. But here we are. The Yoda scene asks more questions than it answers, I think.
Which is what it should be doing this early in the show.
So what do you think?
I saw this episode as a lot of filler. I don't think it progressed the major plot that much. Mm-hmm. About the only two things that happened that were of real significance were, one, we see some moments where the Mandalorian is developing these sort of paternal feelings toward Baby Yoda.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just gonna start calling him Mando Dad now.
I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing is obviously the Yoda baby using the Force. Like, that is obviously a huge fucking deal.
Yeah.
But outside of that, there was, and I guess maybe that Mandalorian made a friend, and they might come back to this planet sometime in the future.
That's on my list of things we'll talk about today.
Yeah.
We're going to do our review, and we're going to talk about some Easter eggs that I noticed, and we're going to maybe get into some theories.
But like, the whole plot line with the Jawas stealing the parts and needing to go get the egg to get them back, that is...
It was a side quest.
Okay, but it... Like, no part of it impacted the overall storyline of bringing Baby Yoda back to the bounty or not.
Yeah.
Like, what's going to happen there?
Yeah, I get it. So, what do you give that out of 10? What'd you give the last one out of 10? Because so far they're 10s for me. I think it's just because I'm in like I'm on this honeymoon trip with it right now.
The first episode was like a 9.5. It was really good. This one, the quality was good. I wish it developed the plot more. 7 or so.
Okay. Yeah.